Okay. Okay, so Jeff has kind of a tagline under his name, and it goes Jeff Johnson, master photographer, artist, educator, chief instigator, which I really like that, Jeff. I think that's awesome. Um, and he says, admittedly, these are self-inflicted titles. However, I have earned the Master of Photography degree from the Professional Photographers of America, and this can only be achieved with high quality imagery and an intense and long-term participation in the industry. In my 40 years as a professional, I have always been one to share exciting ideas and techniques. It only then makes sense that I offer consultations, programs, and workshops, which create a vehicle where I can share the knowledge I have accumulated over these rewarding years and hopefully educate photographers everywhere. Chief instigator? Now, this is an interesting tag. As you may imagine, I've had my fair share of teasing and abuse over this one. A lot of folks think this means troublemaker, which, if you know me, isn't really that far off base. But if you look it up, it means one who urges or provokes action or course to instigate the people to photograph. Well, I altered the last part, but this is exactly what I'm trying to do, instigate. So with that, let me double check, let me make sure. Anyone who's interested in seeing more of Jeff's work and also his workshops, which by the way are amazing, I can say for a fact, go to soulroadtrips.com. Soul is SOUL, roadtrips.com. And with that, may I introduce Jeff Johnson.
Thank you, Ellen. That was very kind. Well, I wrote it, so it's a lot easier to do it that way than because otherwise I feel like I'm sitting there talking to people and bragging about myself, and I don't mean to do that at all. But it's true. It's kind of been this long journey I've been on. I grew up in the business. Folks had a portrait studio in Illinois that I worked for several years until I came out here, and have always wanted to. I was very fortunate that I had obviously Dad to guide me in the right direction, but he knew a lot of people, and if he didn't have an answer to some technique or something, that he knew somebody, and we had Chicagoland to draw from. So it was very fun, very fortunate for me to have such a great education. So I have really tried just to turn that back around and share what I know, my context, my sources of things. So like I say, if I don't have the answer, I'll certainly think I know where I can find it for you. So it's just been a really fun, long career. Growing up in the portrait business, photographing babies and children, and over 1,500 weddings. I also worked for it was the College of Medicine, University of Illinois. So one day I'd be photographing portraits of residents, the next day I'd be photographing an autopsy or a birth. So I've had quite a tremendous career. Also had worked for Sears for a little while, did work for their catalogs and many other things. And all along the way, I've thought, I would love to share these opportunities that I've had with folks. And the Soul Road Trips came from that, where it's really just, and several of you have joined us this evening, who were with us this past weekend. Thanks for coming and hanging out again with me. Really, it's about seeing some unique, whatever our topic is for the workshop, and just having a lot of laughs, having a lot of fun, and everybody laughs at me, but eating a lot of good food is always part of that. And especially the cinnamon rolls once we get to Alamosa. Anyways, so I've had this really, I think, pretty wonderful career, and I'm certainly far from being done with it. And also the opportunity like this to share ideas, things that I've learned. And a couple things I'll just share with you real quick. If you go to Soul Road Trips, I put the link in the meeting chat box. You can see the trips that we're coming up with, and I've got some standard trips that we all like to do, but I also have the Lofoten Islands, not Lofoten, Faroe Islands, coming up in April, or in August. Also have an Alaska trip, which is just 10 days of pure beauty and animals and mountains and something like that. I'm also working on a trip that I'll announce here real soon, but we're going to be spending about 4 or 5 days in New York City for photojournalism, black and white, kind of a fun thing like that, just totally different than what's been out there. So watch for that one. And you mentioned you guys are talking about the contests. I mean, I've been for many years have submitted imagery to the Professional Photographers of Colorado and well, Illinois when I was there, but also the Professional Photographers of America. And while it is a contest, and they've totally revamped everything, if you haven't heard this coming year, I won't go into that, but it's really about not necessarily competing against everybody else. However, they have changed one section to do that, but it's more about learning. It's putting your work in front of other professionals who are trained in, all the aspects, veterans, but also trained to deliver a positive message. So coming from that, my good friend Rick Avalos from down in Pueblo, he and I have started a little, I guess we'll call it a little talk show. It's on the 4th Thursday of every month. It's called, and there's a website by this name. Let me type it in here. The Image Critique Show. And it's just a fun opportunity for you to come and then if I could spell it correctly, that'd be even more impressive. And so it's in the chat box there. And please come and join us the 4th Thursday of every month. It's a 2-hour program. We have members will submit images. Rick and I are the hosts. We bring in another PPA trained judge to just talk about them, critique them. It's not about scoring. It's not about awards. It's just about feedback. And it's just kind of fun show. We try and pick a topic every month to really, rely on more for that particular show. So check that out. Enough of my advertising. I am so grateful, you guys. I'm looking at the count. We're like at 36, 38, and there's a few areas there where there's 2 of you on screen. So my gosh, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to come and sit and listen to me ramble on. I'm going to chat with you about my absolute favorite subject, favorite art, and that's black and white photography. Again, I grew up in this world of photography in the studio, learning. I mean, literally when I started, black and white was still a really major part of the portrait business. Color was kind of that special thing that if you wanted, yeah, I guess we could do color. So I spent the first 15 years of my life pretty much in the dark room, both color and black and white. And I mean, even when I remember Dad had a dark room at the house when I was a little guy. He'd bring some work home at night just to process the negatives. He'd let me do it. And my fingernails would get all dark brown from the chemicals. I remember my mom yelling at him. It was just kind of a funny thing, like he was killing me, so to speak. But I had a chance to go to work for him in my early 20s and realized very quickly that photography was where I wanted to go. And all along the way, the art of black and white was my dad's favorite thing. If you guys are familiar with the name of Josef Karsh, did some beautiful portrait work, and black and white was his thing. And my dad kind of learned to emulate that style. And of course, that's what he taught me. So black and white is just very much to me, the art form, even to me more than color. And I just want to kind of run through what I think, just to share with you, just maybe hopefully different points of view of what I think black and white's all about. So let's see, I'm going to get the screen going here. And I'm going to go with, let's see, that's not what I wanted there. And let's go with that. And there we are. Okay. Can you guys see that show there?
Yep,
We can.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. So let's go with, let's
I
see.
want to know about your screensaver.
Which one? The rocks?
Yeah, is that one of yours? That's pretty cool.
This guy here?
Yeah.
Is that White Pocket?
It is, but that's a standard plug-in or standard with a Mac software.
Is it?
Computer. Yeah, it's not mine.
Oh, shoot.
Oh my goodness.
Well, okay, how about when you went to start your presentation, you had a couple of really cool thumbnails.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you a bunch of images and I can get back to those. But yeah, I have quite a lot of my work all over the place here, and as such, it just happens to be that particular screen is just a screensaver on the Mac. Sorry, I laughed, but thank you for thinking it's mine.
That's awesome.
All right. So you can see that just fine, everybody. You see the art of seeing black and white.
Looks good.
All right. So to me, and again, this goes really back to how I learned photography. We were having this conversation this past weekend of all the bells and whistles that the cameras have these days. And I really wish that the camera manufacturers would start out with either a manual camera or folks would start learning that way, because then you're learning the art of photography. So when my dad suggested that I learn black and white, it really, I don't know, it seemed like a truer path to creativity. Of course, in those days, we didn't get hung up with, there was no such thing as autofocus. There was no such thing as exposure compensation. It was, you metered it, you learned it, and you did it. And it really drove home the fact that photography was an art in itself, and now it's become such a digital thing. Absolutely nothing wrong with it, don't get me wrong, but I kind of feel like it's easy to get lost in all of the settings and all of the myriad of possibilities that your camera can do, which is great, but I kind of feel like we're getting away from photography. So I wanted to kind of just show you this black and white idea that I think is still very real and very powerful. So our eyes see color, but our souls feel black and white. And I'm going to kind of, the whole premise of the show is to kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So black and white, I feel, is a way to communicate better. You know, you can convey messages better, stronger storytelling. Now, again, nothing wrong with color, don't get me wrong there, but there's something about, and the whole premise of my show you'll see is color kind of creates that rosy filter. We've heard that term over the years, where we look at the beautiful leaves, color of the fall leaves, especially, or the red tulips or the blue sky or whatever, and that's all fine and good. And there's obviously lots of beautiful color imagery, so don't get me wrong there. But I think once we take that facade down of color, we can share emotions and feelings so much easier, and we can really helps the viewer to understand what we're trying to do. This is a wonderful saying here. You don't shoot black and white because it's more artsy. You shoot black and white because it better communicates how you feel. Man, I can't agree with that one more. That's just so powerful for me to just look at things and realize that when and it doesn't matter the subject matter. When I go to black and white, there's just a whole new world there waiting for me. So color photography is wonderful because it allows us to capture the beautiful colors. And yes, there's a lot of scenes that really don't work in black and white well. So, you know, keeping that in mind, the fall colors and beautiful flowers and things. But, you know, we have this natural and unaltered state that color, you know, when we first start out in photography, we're learning, obviously we're learning the camera, we're learning f-stops and shutter speeds, but we're looking to capture everything that we see as we see it. And that's kind of, I kind of chuckle now because I was there, but that's kind of what we look at, is recording the scene, whatever the scene may be, as accurately as we possibly can. And while that's very true, that's needed in photojournalism, anything else, that's just the very basic of photography, the very basis to how we start our stories, how we start our art. So when we capture the colors and the saturations, as our minds see it, we're just creating a replica, a duplication of what's there in front of us. And that's all fine and good. But I think once you get into black and white, the color becomes the subject. It can also become a barrier, as I've mentioned before. And so when you get into black and white, you know, either initially or superficially, it allows you to explore the scene, enjoy the lines, the textures, all the different compositional elements, even more intimately. It allows us to really feel the image, explore the emotions. You really get in touch with what's happening in the scene. That's why a lot of photojournalism, obviously was done in black and white in the early days of photography, but I believe are so much more powerful than some of the color photojournalistic images, for example. I know Ellen and I talk about that a lot when we look at her rodeo pictures, and some of those black and whites she does are just stunning. And I think because the black and white lets us get into the story more, and it lets us, this helps us, helps your heart reach out and feel what's going on. So differences between color and black and white is not just the lack of color. I mean, I look at this as the tones of a black and white image are in a sense the colors of that black and white image. It's really a very personal choice. Obviously, it's a step away from reality. So what I was saying before is how we learn to photograph that scene and make the camera work properly, and we record it as identically or as perfectly as we see it. That's all fine and dandy. But when we start getting towards things like black and white, long exposure, intentional camera movement things, we're going away from reality. And I think we're becoming more artistic, more reaching and touching the soul and the heart of not only ourselves, but our viewers. And it's really an attempt to go much deeper and really create, I think it becomes, I don't maybe don't say more of an art, but it definitely makes it a little more solidified in terms of really making the statement. So what this Jennifer Price says, what I love about black and white photographs is that they are more like reading the book than seeing the movie. Let that one soak in for a second, because that's really true. Movies are beautiful. I love movies. Soundtrack, the scene, the scenery, the sound effects, and all that. But there's something about when you sit down and read a book and you just totally immerse yourself in it. This is what black and white does. So put your little thinking cap, your little visual thinking caps on for a minute. Let me follow me in this little story that I have here. So imagine color photography as if you were looking at an impressively colorful scene while standing behind a large plate glass window. You can see the meadows of green, the colorful wildflowers, the crisp white of the rapids in the wandering creek. You can see the snow-capped mountain peaks and the brilliance of the waterfall raging off the cliff's edge, and all against the sky of the richest blue you can ever remember seeing. It's beautiful, delightful, and beyond words. Let's look at the black and white version. Now imagine black and white photography as breaking that plate glass window and wandering into this wondrous scene. You can feel the crisp breeze, smell the sweetness of the flowers, hear the rapids in the creek. You can touch the rocks, the plants, and the trees. You can wander anywhere you wish. You can experience any emotions that you rise. You can take with you any memories or feelings, even if they are solitude, pleasure, pain, or sadness. I believe that black and white photography is your personal experience. And again, this is just my interpretation, but a lot of the photographers I know that really love and do a lot of successful black and white, I know they would agree with this, that it's almost like you're opening that door. You're moving those beautiful color doors out of the way and getting into the scene even more. So color is very descriptive, but black and white is very interpretive. So learning how to see differently for black and white photography, and this is a talent, I should say more of a technique, if you will, because it's not something that you're necessarily only born with. It's something you learn. And just little things like us landscape photographers, what's engraved in our souls is to do the golden hour. Well, golden hour isn't that important in black and white. Matter of fact, I would say there's a lot of golden hour images that I have that are just stunning in color that you convert them to black and white, and they tend to not be as powerful. So it can work the other way as well. But soft, subtle light will appear very flat and low in contrast. Then you find yourself upping the contrast in your image and not getting the feel you're after. Dramatic light and higher contrast scenes are more desirable for black and white. It just makes it that much easier to tell the story when you're not relying on the colors, you're relying on the black and white tones. So shooting between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. is now part of your routine, okay? Keep that in mind. That just makes your day longer, but hey, we'll sleep when we die, right? So learning to see differently, spend some time and study the works of these guys. You've probably heard of some of them, but obviously Ansel Adams, very popular fella. Minor White, John Sexton were both proteges of Ansel Adams. Of course, John Sexton also went ahead And I don't know if you are familiar, if you remember the artist Kenny Rogers, he was quite a photographer in his own right. He learned from John Sexton, beautiful black and white and color. Juliana Gaspadaro is a very current photographer. She very much beautiful work, long exposure, black and white architecture, just stunning. She has some beautiful workshops that she does too. Of course, going back a little bit in time, Henri Cartier-Bresson and Fan Ho, two of my favorite street and photojournalism works. Just look at the stories. Just sit back and really, you'll feel like you're falling into their imagery. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. Amongst many other photojournalistic photographers. And Josef Karsh, the name I mentioned earlier. And if you haven't heard of him, I'm pretty sure you've seen some of his work. He photographed, I think the number was like over 100,000 artists, movie stars, politicians, heads of state. I mean, this beautiful black and white portraiture. One of my favorite stories, he went in to photograph Winston Churchill, and he had his lights set up. He had his stand-in do the pose so they could prepare for when Churchill came in the room. Churchill comes in, he's got his famous cigar, and Karsh went over and pulled the cigar out of his mouth and took the picture real quick. And it's that picture you've seen with Churchill's got his right hand on the desk, his left hand on his hip, and he's just got this glare into the camera. And after that frame, as Karsh's story goes on, he didn't know if he was going to be executed or it was going to be okay. And Churchill looked at him and said, "Brave man, beautiful portrait, thank you." So he got lucky there. Anyways, so now learning to see differently, again, there's some help that you can do. Learning to pre-visualize, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but identifying contrast range and tonal range and total subtleties. Mainly learning about what colors translate into black and white tones. And of course, there's the zone system that Ansel Adams, he didn't really create, but he sure made it popular. Here's a link here in green. Go ahead, and this is not I'll have to send this to, let me see if I can copy real quick and put it in the, oops, hang on. I'm going too fast here. This is a Wikipedia. Matter of fact, just go to Wikipedia and type in the zone system. It'll give you a lot more descriptive of all the different avenues and aspects of the zone system. So the zone system itself, I'll just touch on this briefly, is basically 11 individual areas or zones of reflectivity. I'll show you some charts here as well. Zone 0 is pure black with no detail, and it's okay to use, despite what you hear from some judges. Zone 10, the 11th, is pure white with no detail. Again, it's okay to use. Now, Zone 10 was kind of created because at the time this whole zone system was created, they were printing on paper. You guys know what a photograph is, right? So they were printing it. So Zone 10 was the white, mostly the borders. So white with no detail. So ideally, but I'll show you a little more explanation of how the zones were used. So what it's used for is to determine correct exposure. Placing zones where you want them can tell a better story, and it also will allow you for pre-visualization. All right, a couple of things I'll chat about here. So pre-visualization is, again, something Ansel Adams really pushed if you look in his books, but it is a most magnificent tool, probably the least expensive tool I've ever spent money on, because this is purely your imagination and your knowledge. Anybody can learn it. It's not something that you either have or not. It's a talent that you can easily learn. And basically what you're doing, find that scene, whatever it is that catches your eye, and take a split second to visualize that scene in black and white as we're talking tonight, but visualize that picture completed, hanging on the wall of your home. And that will give you a better direction, better plan, a better map of how you now are going to create, how you're going to compose, how you're going to expose. So when I talk about the zones, our cameras are all set for a zone 5, which is a 18% gray. Well, it's kind of the middle of the road, and it's a good place to start because it's giving you a chance to have everything in the scene recorded without being blown out in either the highlights or the shadows. But also keep in mind, as you learn the zone system or you get a feel for it, zone 5 is just a medium gray, 18% gray. Here's the zone system here. So the first panel is the full tonal gradation from zone 0 to zone 10. The second one there is the actual scale, is what you see when you look up different if you go searching for this in Wikipedia or something like that. The bottom scale, I'll explain that one to you in a minute. But let's talk about the individual zones here. So all photography meters, cameras, manufacturers do this on purpose. They, like I said, they set it up for an zone 5, which is 18% gray. It's also called middle gray. It's also called a neutral gray. That's good, again, because it allows the meter then to record more of your scene if you have brights and shadows. But it's also can be misleading, because how many times have you gone out to photograph a snowy scene with a bright sky, and then you sit and look at it, your snow is gray? Well, it's because the meter is telling you correct exposure, however your meter works, if it's a needle or numbers or whatever sliding scale. It's putting that large amount of white snow into a zone 5, which is gray. Well, we know snow is not gray, so more appropriately, fresh snow is going to be more on a zone 7, whereas a bright blue sky in the middle of the day is right in the middle. That is medium gray. For example, the zone 3, it will be a deep shadow, but it has good detail in it. So looking at the zone system here real quickly, 0 is black with no detail, exists. Again, 10 is paper white or white with no detail. So the next, so the full range, as I mentioned, is from zones 0 through 10. But the dynamic range, which is what we're pretty much going to work on in our photographs, is going to be about a zone 1 through a zone 9. And this gives us a black with very, very subtle detail and a white with a very subtle detail. And then you talk about the textural range, which is a little bit narrower, again, zone 2 through 7. And this, excuse me, 8, this gives us those low and high tones with nice detail in there. So you see we've got several zones here where we don't blow out highlights or lose detail and shadow. So this is what we're trying to accomplish in our color work, any of our work. But really, when you get to black and white, again, this is going to show even more. So there's two things to understand here. This is the 11-step gradation. If you notice carefully, I'm going to back up a slide here, because if you notice here, and this is the common, if you look this up, each one of those squares is basically just a gray, okay? When you get here to the actual tonal range, we have 256 shades of gray, 0 through 255. Each of those squares represents about 23 of those zones. And if you look carefully, each zone is darker on the left side as opposed to the right side of each zone. So looking carefully in here, you've got it's a little bit darker than it is over here. There are 23 zones, 23 shades of gray. Whoops, two fast fingers there. 23 shades of gray in each one of those zones. Now, we talk about contrast range. Contrast range is the difference from the shadow area to the highlight area, okay? The tonal range now is the variance of contrast within a single zone. I'll leave the slide up a minute so you can kind of let that soak in. We'll talk about this one later. So we always try and get good contrast in our images, period, color, black and white. But in black and white, we've taken that color out of it. Contrast is it's going to rear its ugly head a lot more. But to get an awesome lifelike three-dimensional look, it's when we work in that tonal range where we can get the face of a rock isn't just darker on one side and lighter on the other, but there's a nice range of gradation through those highlights to shadows. A little bit more of a challenge, but very doable. Jumping to a new subject here because time. There's about, right now as last count, about 17 different black and white conversion techniques, and it's mostly softwares. I've done Lightroom, you probably all have. That's a pretty good one. That's got a nice little range with the color sliders where you can do the tones. Photoshop has several options. As you can see, I have convert to grayscale and desaturate. No, don't do it. I will hunt you down. Don't do it. Channel mixer, pretty good. The black and white adjustment layer that's in Photoshop has gotten to be pretty good. It's very similar to the black and white mode in Lightroom. It allows you to operate tonal ranges of colors in a black and white mode. I'll have to show you that. I'm going to pull up an image here in a minute and just show you those things. Topaz Luminar 4, I think we're where we are at Luminar now. On1, Capture One, so on. Those are pretty good. Topaz actually, they had a black and white conversion a few years ago. If you had it, you can still get it. It's not part of the newer photo AI right now. So, but I would definitely go for the Nik Silverflex Pro. If you don't have the Nik suite, definitely get that, because there's several softwares in there that do some great stuff. The Silverflex Pro is phenomenal. I think it's the best black and white conversion out there. It allows you to, there's some presets. There are also many sliders of different areas. You can even go in to my favorite area and emulate old films. There's a Panatomic X film, was a 32 speed film that we used to shoot that's just red blind. So the color, skin color would just get to be this dark, crunchy, really cool thing, especially if you had the right old crunchy old face. So that's it, but there's such beautiful options there for the Nik Silverflex Pro to do your black and white. Let's see, I'm going to just run through some of my imagery to kind of show you what, I'm sorry. Oh, thought I heard something. Oh, hang on now. It's jumping ahead for me. Just to show you some of the black and white that I've done, and hang on, it's moving by itself here. Must have the timer on. Okay, just to show you what we can do with the tonal ranges, and then even going at the far end, the high end of, so you don't necessarily have to have 10, 5. This only has about 3 zonal ranges in here to still get a very effective and storytelling kind of a piece. Certainly love the mountains, snow-covered mountains with the black and white to get down to the deep shadows and the highlights of the trees. This almost goes into an infrared kind of a look. Love the water. Get some beautiful clouds. You get that sky, drop that sky out. Black is very much an Ansel Adams-esque kind of a photograph. Bringing those highlights up to the whites to really give you some beautiful tones throughout a scene. White sand dunes with just a nice story here of somebody walked through my scene and it made me mad at first, and I realized, no, it's a cool story. Shadows, man, what a great option to play with in black and white. So we had this very unique building in the first place, but look at the shadows from the escape, the ladder coming up the side of the building, the little porches with the shadows. So you have those straight lines of darker tones, and then you have the slight curves that emulate repeating patterns throughout composition. I left the side of the building on the left and a little bit of the shadow of the next side of the building, just to keep you in this scene. So we have the repetition of the patterns of the windows. Again, in composition, a repetition of patterns is comforting. It allows you to feel like you're looking at the right thing. And then the depth from the highlights of the windowsills to the deep shadows of the ladder just gives you a full range there. Some nice tones throughout the scene from, again, kind of more of a higher, using more of the zone system to capture the highlights and shadows of the scenes. Sand dunes, I mean, I can just keep going back there the rest of my life. But getting portraiture going with some black and white to tell some stories. If I was to, or the color version of this was very much a cool shot, but his blue denim jacket and the little bit of pattern in he had a little bit of a blanket in front of him there on the lower right, and then his silver hair. It was an interesting story, but when I can tone those down and keep it where it's just these short ranges of tones, this is a very harsh, high contrast. So there's in between with each zone, there's not as much tonal range. There's higher contrast, so it's more dramatic. You can pull in the sad story, pull in the feelings there of this. Now we go to something that has, again, more of a tonal range in it within the each zone, gives us that more subtle roundness and depth to the scene. Just a very simple scene I found in Alaska one day. this old truck just sitting there, but the little bit of cloudy sky really helped tell the story of this abandoned piece. And again, I thought the higher ranges of tone, so we have the very low range in the shadows on the truck, and then it jumps to like zone 7 and 8 for the rest of the scene. It just really kind of contradicts what we would see standing there or what we would normally think. So it's just a selection of artists, a choice of creating a piece that was different. Very high contrast here. We have the whites of the soft water, and then of course the deep shadows. Hard to tell from what you're seeing, but there's just the slightest bit of detail in these shadows. Of course, the water went, come back here. The water went nice and dark, which is something that was very famous from Ansel Adams type of work. Same idea here. I wanted to have something dramatic, so I did this close-up of this daisy. Get the name Xenia, is that what it is? Now this was also focus stacking because I was so close. So I focused on the closest tip of the petals, focused on the front of the base of the flower. Okay, that's my bad. Focused on the back and then the very back petals. Did a focus stack, dropped out the background so I'd have this beautiful black and white. Oh, for crying out loud, stop moving. I'm so sorry. So we'd have this extremely detailed but very strong composition of the bottom of a flower. I mean, a lot of times I think the bottoms of the flowers are just as beautiful. Again, another waterfall. We've got slow shutter speed to give the motion, but also the full tonal range through the little bit of snow and ice and then down into the deep shadows, but there's still detail, just subtle bits of detail here and there. My favorite, if you've never been to Old Car City in Georgia, let me know, I'll take you there. It's the coolest place. And these cars that have sat there for almost 100 years now are covered in lichen and mold and just rusty old messes, but man, are they beautiful. Churches always offer wonderful scenery for black and white. Again, I think it allows you to go beautiful skylight, beautiful light in the windows. Those were all very colorful, kind of things. And then of course the yellow light of the lamps hanging in there. So it was a beautiful scene. But again, I think going to this black and white, and it's got a little bit of a selenium tone. Selenium was a chemical that we used years ago that basically what it was designed for was to preserve a black and white photograph. It would stop any development that maybe you didn't handle. If your developer or your stop bath was bad when you were processing the print, this would stop it permanently and then keep it. It was more of an archival move, but it also added a very slight gold and blue cast to the image. The highlights would go gold and the shadows would go blue. And I just love that. So I recreate that quite a bit in some of my antique-ish, the old cars, the churches, things like that. Same with the building here. Now this is more of a little bit of a blue cast of these two buildings that were before and after kind of a thing, now and then sort of thing. Also getting into just nature, having the more of an infrared look, letting the leaves change those leaves into more of a high tone. I don't use infrared. I do have a camera that's converted for that, but more times than not, I'm just shooting and converting an infrared look in Photoshop. Sand dunes, you guys have seen those. Love the old houses. This one just sits on the road down near White Sands National Park and Preserve, but it just had a wonderful story about it. It was an old restaurant at one time. Love the macro, love the close-up of flowers. Obviously, even closer than the whole flower, this was a sunflower. And again, the back of it. So just look at the beautiful detail, the little hairs and such at the crown of the base of the flower, and then the softness of the petals, the very subtle textures and lines that create the yellow petals. More dunes. Just love the shapes, very sensual and descriptive kind of patterns and shadows and light, just really more about the tones than it is about the actual subject itself, I feel. One of my little creations that did well for me in PPA competition, but again, kind of that going higher tones in the upper scales, zones 5 and up in the zone system here. Kind of going the other direction, mostly lower zones. The surprisingly, that highlight side on the building is only a zone 5. The shiny highlight side of the cross is only a zone 6. So I'm staying in the lower half of the zones, but you can see optically how using heavier tones can really create a seemingly high contrast, but this has a wonderful tonal range throughout. Again, an opportunity to use a full range here to get the highlights of the setting sun on the faces of the canyon edges and then in the shadows. But again, still making sure there's a little bit of detail in those shadows so it doesn't look like black holes. There's something psychological about what they would call, in competitions, we refer to them as black holes. And when you have an area that is black and has no detail, what happens is the viewer's brain looks at that and tries to make something out of it. They're looking for detail, they're looking for a story, and what it's doing, it's pulling them away from the story you're trying to tell. So having little areas of black with no detail is fine. That's your zone 1. But on the other hand, if I would have this whole canyon wall on the right there to be all black, it would have been that black hole and pulled you in and not let you enjoy the rest of the scene. Same idea here with this rocks, using composition of the leading line here of the white rocks that take you up to the lighthouse. But those other rocks are pretty dark. If I'd have let them go darker, you would have been stuck down here at the base of this scene. But that little bit of white trail allows you to walk on up through and find the lighthouse, and the gray sky holds you in the scene there. Not so much all black and white, but just something that really shows strong composition. If you look at the orange seat, that's your center of interest, your focal point. And if you look at all the lines, the seat numbers, the front of the seats themselves, the support between, I mean, it just, there's lines drawing everywhere that pull you right back into that orange seat. So that was a very strong compositional element. This one was one of those that I was very fortunate to have it score 100 in a PPA competition. Thor's Well, if you haven't been out there, let's go. It's absolutely astonishing to use a slower shutter speed to get the water movement, but not so slow that it all gets that creamy, milky, silky kind of look. Was my choice here to still give it some direction, to still show you the power of the water, and those black volcanic rocks that are all around it was quite the challenge. But did you leave just a little bit of detail with the setting sun to give you a full tonal range, but also to give you some opportunity to jump around from whites to blacks. Same with this old church here, which I just discovered they moved it or destroyed it. I don't know. It's in Nebraska. Well, it was one of my favorites. But again, to use the higher contrast and leave the door black, which I've been talking about, I want your eyes to get stuck in that door. Obviously, the sky has gone dark because of taking those sky blues and turning them down deeper blues to go black in black and white. But leaving the door, since the doors were missing, I thought that was very apropos for this particular image. It's drawing you into the church to wonder what's happened here. What happened in days gone by? Some more of our white sands. Mount Moran, Jackson Lake area. Dropped a little boat in there for a little bit of storytelling. The sky has gone a nice gradient from a very dark gray behind the mountains to a black at the top. Again, that gradient gives you just a little bit more of feeling of depth to the scene. Again, a long exposure here, so you can see the clouds at the top were moving, and this is just sunlight hitting the building, not a spotlight like that, and but allowing for the right side of the building to be just a little bit of detail without getting big black hole there, so to speak. Crazy, twisted aspen forest over by Aspen, actually. You may recognize this little shot here. Love the sun just busting through a storm, hitting some of the mountaintops. Again, some storytelling here where we have this newer building guarding and protecting this older building in Boston. Just the closeness of the two buildings just led me to really try to tell a story here of the old and the new of the Boston area. And I find my favorite creepy baby dolls. Everywhere I go, I have creepy baby dolls, and people look at it and they go, "Oh my God, what are you doing to us?" Well, that's that little bit of show. Let me pop out of that one here. And let's make sure you're all still around. That's cool.
We are.
I'm going to just go, let's see, how are we doing on time? I talked for about 45 there. Are we okay for a few more minutes?
Go as long as you need.
Okay, let's do this. I'm going to open up my Photoshop and just share with you a couple of how I create my black and white images. And if there's any questions, let me just look at the chat box real quick. Ron was asking if I use any red or orange filters to get dark sky. You know, I did in film all the time. The 25A red filter is my favorite for film, but I don't with digital. I don't really find it necessary. I think I will tend to you know, let me show you that. I'm just trying to think of how to explain, but let me show you. I will go into my color adjustment layer in a black that I'm preparing for black and white and alter the colors just enough so that I can make those blue skies darker. If I just take this now to a black and white, I will get you know, nice black and white. But if I can go in and alter my blue skies a little bit more and such, that I can get a darker tone out of it. And I'm just trying to figure out how I got Zoom is covering my tools. So hold on just a second here while I see if I can shrink this guy. Okay. And for some reason, it's slammed all my tools. I hate when that happens. It's taken all my tools and buried them. So hold on a second while I find them here. It's funny how when you talk about things can happen during a talk, they do, kids, it happens. For some reason, all my palettes got stacked up in one pile. So hang on while I find my layers palette, and there we go. All right, that was just really weird. Okay, so what I've done here real quick is to in my layers palette. Well, let me drag it over here for you. Layers palette here, I have a selective color layer in the middle here, which just really pushes, let me turn this one off, pushes the tones of the colors into a little bit deeper. Let me just go to selective color here and show you. So this is one of my favorite tools, and pull it up over here. So I can take the blues and take them deeper than you would normally do for a color. Now we would push them, so you'd look at color and go, no, that's not right. That's not what I want to do for color. But for going black and white, like my blues and cyans, I'll make those a lot darker, because that's going to allow that blue sky to go to that black or that really deep gray that was very popular with the old Ansel Adams type of black and white type of things. I will also use this and go into the whites and push them up just a little bit more, so I can keep a little bit more of separation between, in this case, the clouds and the snow, the sunlight and the snow on the mountains. So then, get this out the way here. I will go into a Nik Collection. We're going to go to Silver Effects Pro, and I'm afraid this is probably going to throw the other screen. Hold on, let me see. Nope, here we go. Now, I don't know if you've ever used this, and it can be very daunting at first. So it throws you up on the left thumbnails of possibilities. Here's the neutral one. Then there's an underexposed one. Then there's overexposed. So I mean, it just kind of gives you either presets, if you will. This is high structure, another high structure that gives you more sharpness, be careful, don't overdo that. You want high key. So it kind of either gives you a selection, a choice to either just leave your image that way, or like I like to do is start with the neutral and then go over to the far right. And I have just a plethora, I always wanted to use that word in a show, a plethora of colors, a plethora of sliders and possible outcomes. So a point that I want to make here real quick, there is not really a correct black and white outcome. There's not really a correct place for your whites to go, for your shadows to go. It's your storytelling. You do this, that how you feel fits best. So I like to use these, well, first of all, buried underneath here is film types. And I was mentioning before, when you drop this down, here's some old black and white films, and it just gives you some presets, kind of like the thumbnails on the left over there. I've gone through some of them, and I'm not, actually, they used to have, there's a few more buried under there. They used to have a whole bunch in here. But I prefer, I'm just going to stay with neutral. Nope. Natural. Excuse me. I'm going to start with these sliders here. And this red slider is going to control the red tones. You see how we're lightening up the light, sunlight hitting the dunes? So I can add a little bit of punch there. Yellows are going to, if you think of, and this is true in Lightroom, if you open the color palette, and you remember as kids how we remembered the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, if you remember that name, that's how these are set up: red, orange, yellow, green, and so on. So if you look at the initials here, here's Roy's name. It's not quite fully here because it doesn't have the orange slider in this case, but we can alter the reds through oranges, which are the face of the sunlit sand dunes. Yellows expand that a little bit. You can see the foreground, which has had more yellow in it than reds. Greens, let's see what that does. Very little bit, there's usually very little bit of greens. Cyans, let's see what we can do. Now see how I can take that sky down. Look at the upper left mostly around the clouds. And then when I take that blue, I can make that go down. Now you gotta be careful. The sky goes dark, but check out the shadows on the left side of the mountains. I'm gonna lose those. So what's the happy medium? There's some workarounds there too. But this gives me that feeling of going to that very dramatic low sun. This was just before sunset. The interesting story here is, as I pulled up, it was in February, I believe, a few years back, and I opened the door and got my camera out, and about blew me over. So I had to sit in the back of my truck with the door open just a little bit so I could actually photograph this without getting blown away. So I'm looking at these sliders. So I have brightness adjustments, and I have contrast adjustments, then we have structure and so on. So you can see all the sliders that give us just a lot to work with. So I'm going to take the overall brightness down just a little bit. Come on, grab it. There we go. And I'm going to open up the midtones. That's going to give me some guts back into the mountains and a little bit of the shadows. But I want the highlights to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to pull those down. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for that detail in the highlights and detail in the shadows so that I don't lose anything. I've got a big black shadow here in the middle of that dune, another one over here. So I just want to make sure by working the sliders, I can open those areas up, and working the different minute areas of a scene, I can control the highlights, I can control the shadows. Notice I won't use the contrast slider. That's very true in Lightroom and Photoshop. Contrast, I want to do intimate adjustments. I don't want to do global as much as I don't have to, because contrast slider, you move it to the right, blacks go black, whites go white. You move to the left, it's gray. So here I'm allowing myself, now I don't need to amplify whites, but I could bring the blacks up just a little bit, just a tiny bit, to get some detail in this area here, these shadows. And then I keep going back and just bringing the tones down to where I get the punch that I want. So I like that right there. And really, at this good enough, we'll just hit apply, and it comes back to us in a new layer. And should happen shortly. And there we go. So that's kind of how I would do a black and white of a mountain scene. And here is, it gives me a new layer, as you can see, where I can control. Here's my color that I came from, and here's the black and white. Now, little trick for these kind of things. If you don't know this, this is pretty cool. You'll see right now that it is a layer that I've done the adjustments in Silver Efex Pro. I cannot go back to that layer. But if I would have set, here's the layer I came from right here. If I would have gone up to filter and done convert for smart filters, if you're not familiar with this one, this puts a little tiny thumbnail on the bottom right corner of the image there. And what happens is then I go to Silver Efex Pro, and this will actually attach itself to this layer, which if I don't like the result when I come back and go, oh, that's not what I want, I can actually double click on that Silver Efex Pro under layer of my color layer and go back to where I left it and adjust it some more. So that's a huge tool right there, because as I mentioned, I'll repeat that. Right now, the way I've done it is I have to accept what I've done, or I trash that layer and go back and do it again. But if you make your main layer, let me just point out something else. Here's my main picture at the bottom, and then all the accoutrements that I've added to it on top. Then I did a flattened layer visible. So this is a combination of all of these. So I've done my Silver Efex on this one. So what would happen, you make this underneath filter is convert for smart filters. Then when you do your plugins, it allows you, it puts a little extension underneath this layer. You'll see this Silver Efex Pro will now be underneath. You now can double click on that and take it back to Silver Efex Pro right where you left it and tweak it some more. That's huge, I think, right there. I don't know why I didn't do it this time, but that's what I'm telling you. Let's go real quick here and show you one more, and then we get into some questions and comments and good jokes and things. This is I was talking about Old Car City, which is absolutely a delight. Old bus that's sitting there and no windshield. So I climbed up on the bumper to shoot this shot that you probably normally wouldn't see of a bus. And I went in and did my Silver Efex Pro and just brought the tones in there where there's very dark here on the walls and the shadows, but a close look, there's still just a little bit of detail. Brought the highlights down of the trees and the overall density, the brightness of the bus itself. So it gave it a little bit more of a grungy kind of a feel. And then I add my texture overlays, and we can talk about that some other time. And I have a series of just things. This happened to be a portrait background in a friend of mine's studio that I drop over the top of it, change the layer mode to soft light so you can see through it, and then I play with the opacity. I like the blue cast in it, just to give it, again, that selenium tone feel that I grew up with, but still has that abandoned overall kind of icky feel of something like this at Old Car City. Yeah, you get a bunch of you guys together and I'll take you there. It's fantastic. Let's see. I'm going to come back to you guys here at Zoom. And let's see here. That's not it. There we go. Just stop the share. All right. I've been chatting for a good hour here, almost. Questions, thoughts?
Well, that was awesome, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. A couple of questions in the chat. Let me just hit those real quick, if I may.
Please.
All right, let's see. I got Ron's question. Michael's asking me if I intentionally use camera settings to capture scenes in high key and low key, or are those effects created in post-processing? Both high key and low key images in your portfolio are incredible. Oh, thanks, Michael. Yes, I will definitely use the I'm thinking zone system when I'm shooting black and white. So I may not just zero out my meter to get the red exposure. If I have a scene that might be predominantly light tones, I might overexpose it on purpose just to stay in those higher values, the zones, the white zones, if you will, gray zones. If I'm going something for, but then even that, I will go down and if I'm going to do something that's going to be heavier, darker, however you want to look at it, I'm carefully not going to underexpose, but obviously get the right exposure, get a good exposure, but maybe lean that way a little bit, because a lot of times, to me, it's not terribly important to have tremendous detail and shadows. I can get my details by adding my texture overlays if I need. I just don't want to have these big black holes, as I mentioned. So, Kathy says, great presentation. Well, thank you very much. What's the difference between a smart filter and a smart object? Smart filters are just, they're really kind of the same thing in a sense. But a smart filter allows you to, the smart object is, it's a math thing. It's converting it to a different algorithm. So it allows you to do a lot more to it. Whereas a smart filter allows you to just add some techniques or changes to the layer, but have them still be separate so you can access them. It's about the simplest way I can put that. Why don't I shoot in black and white? You know, a lot of times, when digital first started happening, I started shooting in black and white and realized at the time the cameras, the sensors and the cameras weren't good enough, really, comparatively now, to capture all of the information in black and white. I want to capture a raw file and I want to have the colors to work with, as I showed you some quick techniques there of being able to alter certain colors so I know I can get the right tones I want in black and white. If I let the camera decide black and white, and again, if you shoot in raw, even if you shoot it in black and white, you still have color. So I just would rather, again, for my workflow, I'd rather have that color image to alter, separate my greens and yellows if I have to in a forested scene or high sunlight on some trees. Bring those blues darker, brighten up my reds so that when you bring reds a little bit more intense and deeper red, they'll go a little darker grays, just things like that. Can't really do that as well if you shoot it or bring it in as black and white. So I'm going to do all those pre things in Lightroom before I convert it to black and white. Let's see. Excellent presentation. Kathleen Wade says, thank you very much. The Nik Silver FX Pro is definitely awesome. I'm also putting together a black and white workshop. So stay tuned for that one. It'll probably be like an afternoon and we'll get into more detail of how I shoot black and white, how I convert it, and you guys can certainly follow along. Do you change the rear display to view in black and white? You know what? There's something that I didn't hit on, and I know I'm in trouble for this with some of you. There's an actual filter, and I'm going to make them. I owe some people these things. So if you're in the group, I apologize. I've created an amber filter. It's a dark chocolate. I've tested many Roscoe gels to do this, and I put it in an old Geppi slide mount. That may not mean anything to most of you. Just like an old slide, and I have a lanyard hanging around my neck. And what it does, I hold it in front of my eye, and I look at my scene. And what it does is it takes the color out of the scene. Everything's just kind of a dark amber. But what it does is it allows you to see light more so. So it's an easy conversion. So to kind of ask that question, I don't look at it. I don't look at the image in black and white in the camera. I would rather look at it that way. Again, that's just how I learned. But yeah, so. And a couple of people said they learned so much. That's very cool. Don't have silver effects. So Lightroom's black and white. So be careful with, okay, let me jump ahead here. Don't have Silver Efex Pro, and Lightroom have used clarity to get local contrast enhanced. Yes, I use clarity and texture quite a bit. I liked them both, but be careful because it adds contrast. But it's not, it's kind of like the contrast slider. You either get all or nothing. I would rather build the highlights the way I want them to be, build the shadows the way I want them to be, if that makes sense. Silver Efex, the clarity slide, I've got a little trick. There was a little technique years ago, and some of you know this, called the Orton effect, where it's a nice, crisp, sharp image, color or black and white, and there's a little bit of a glow added to the highlights. I do that a lot. It gives us some feeling. So I will kick up the texture slider, depending on the image, 50, 60, 70 points on the in Lightroom, and then take the clarity minus, no more than minus 25, 10, 15, 20. And it just, your image is sharp, but it just gives those highlights just a effervescent, just a very soft glow. It's just a really cool effect. So Kathy says, thank you for the information. Well, you're very welcome. Any other questions? Any other?
Yes, Jeff.
Yes,
Um,
Kathy.
How do you achieve the blue and gold tones and the shadows for digital? And
You kind of, sorry, girl, you kind of broke up there. How do I do what?
how do you achieve the blue and gold tones and the shadows for digital? It's
yeah.
underneath Silver FX Pro.
No, I actually, that's a little formula that I've created is a gradient overlay. And I'll have to show you that sometime. But it's basically just creating a gradient overlay where the shadows are a deep blue and the highlights are a kind of a darker gold, medium to darker gold. And when it's applied, it, you know, takes those shadows in it, but then you take the opacity way down. So it's almost a point where someone would have to show you it's there to be obvious, but yet it does give a mood to the scene.
Great presentation. Thank you so much, Jeff.
You are so welcome. Well, guys, thank you all for tuning in tonight. I see we've had in the upper 30s. That's very cool. I'm excited that you thought I had something good to say.